The lighthouse at Drowning Point. The wind howled across the cliffs of Drowning Point, carrying with it the sharp tang of salt and the faint scent of something fouled and old. Waves crashed against jagged rocks far below, each impact sending a mist of sea spray high into the air. It was the kind of night that made even seasoned sailors uneasy, but for Nora, the sea had always been a source of fascination. Tonight, however, fascination was mingled with dread. She had arrived in the small coastal town at twilight, just as the fog began rolling in. The locals had been polite enough but wary, offering warnings in hushed tones. "Don't go near the lighthouse after dark," said the innkeeper, a grizzled man named Harris. His eyes darted toward the cliffs and his knuckles tightened around the mug of beer he held. "Storm's coming and that light, well, it's not a friend to anyone who's curious." Nora smiled politely. "I've been studying lighthouses for years. I don't scare easily." Harris didn't answer. He only shook his head and muttered something that sounded like a curse under his breath. The journey to the lighthouse. By midnight, the fog had thickened into a wall of gray that swallowed the moon. Nora stood at the edge of the cliffs, looking up at the lighthouse. Its white tower rose starkly into the sky, its light sweeping slowly, cutting through the fog in a steady rhythm. The sound of the sea was deafening and the wind threatened to knock her off balance. She wrapped her coat tightly and began the climb along the narrow, winding path that led to the lighthouse. The air grew colder with each step, and the fog seemed almost alive, swirling around her, forming shadows that twisted and writhed. As she reached the base of the lighthouse, the door loomed like the mouth of some ancient creature, waiting to swallow her. She hesitated, noticing something odd. The door was slightly ajar, moving just enough in the wind to emit a soft, creaking moan. Inside, the lighthouse smelled of damp wood and rust. Salt water had seeped in through cracks in the walls, and the stairwell spiraled upward into darkness. Nora flicked on her flashlight and stepped cautiously onto the stairs. Whispers in the darkness. She had climbed only a few steps when she heard it. A faint whisper like someone murmuring her name from far away. "Nora. Nora." Her heart raced. She spun around, shining her flashlight across the empty stairwell. Nothing. The whispering stopped, but now the walls seemed to hum with a low vibration, as if the lighthouse itself were alive, breathing around her. Shaking off a shiver, she continued upward. The stairs groaned beneath her weight, echoing in the tower. With every turn, the whispers returned, always distant, always just beyond her comprehension. When she finally reached the top, the lantern room opened before her. The great Fresnel lens glowed faintly as though it had been lit by some unseen hand. Beyond the glass, the sea churned violently, black and endless. And then she saw them. Eyes on the water. At first she thought it was a trick of the waves. Dark shapes moving beneath the surface, massive forms gliding silently in the foam. But they weren't waves. They were eyes. Hundreds of pale, luminescent eyes, staring directly at the lighthouse. Nora stumbled back, gripping the rail. Her flashlight flickered and died, leaving her in the oppressive darkness of the lantern room. The eyes didn't move closer, they didn't need to. They were watching, always watching. A cold voice, wet and gurgling, whispered in her ear. "Why have you come?" She spun around, but there was no one there. The voice had come from the darkness itself, the very walls of the lighthouse. The light from the Fresnel lens suddenly swung in a strange rhythm, faster than it should, illuminating the fog in sharp bursts. And in those bursts she saw figures, tall, dark, humanoid shapes standing on the cliff's edge, their eyes glowing like the ones in the water. The keeper's warning. Her mind raced. The town's warnings, Harris's muttered curse, all made sense now. This was no ordinary lighthouse. Something ancient and hungry lurked here, and it had been waiting for someone foolish enough to climb the stairs. The wind slammed the door shut, cutting off her escape. The figures on the cliffs didn't move, they just watched. Then one stepped forward and the lighthouse shuddered. The air inside grew thick with the smell of brine and decay. "Leave," the voice said again, now louder, almost shouting. "Or join us." Nora backed toward the door, but it would not open. The Fresnel lens began spinning wildly, throwing her in blinding light and shadows. She saw the eyes in the water rise higher, breaking the surface as shapes began to emerge, long serpentine forms, slick with seawater, mouths opening to reveal rows of teeth that glinted in the flashing light. The descent. Panic surged. Nora turned back toward the spiral stairs and began to run downward, tripping and scraping her hands and knees on the cold stone. The whispers had turned into shrill screams, echoing from every wall, filling her ears with 1,000 voices crying out in agony. At the base of the lighthouse, the fog pressed in like a living thing. She stumbled into the night, running toward the cliff path that led back to the town. The wind lashed at her face and she could hear the water crashing below, more violent than ever. And then she heard it, a low wet chuckle from the sea. The eyes in the water turned toward her, following her every step. Figures emerged from the mist along the cliffs, more numerous than she could count. Their glowing eyes reflected in the wet rocks like fire, their whispers now a chorus of hunger. The lighthouse takes its toll. Nora reached the edge of the cliffs, looking back at the lighthouse. Its light swung lazily now as if nothing had happened, its presence benign to any casual observer. But she knew the truth. The lighthouse was a beacon, not for ships but for something else. Something that waited in the dark waters, that thrived on fear, that called the curious to their doom. She stumbled, nearly falling over the edge, but managed to catch herself. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling from cold and terror. In the distance she saw the lights of the town, safe, warm, mundane. Yet she knew she could never tell anyone what she had seen. The lighthouse stood tall against the night, its beam cutting through the fog, innocent-looking and cruel. The night never ends. Later, in her room at the inn, Nora could not sleep. Every sound from the sea, every gust of wind, made her jump. She stared out the window at the cliffs, imagining eyes in the water, imagining figures emerging from the fog. And then she realized something worse. Even with her eyes closed, the lighthouse's beam lingered in her mind. It pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, a relentless reminder of what waited for the curious. She could feel the whispers in her ears, soft and insistent. Come back, we are waiting. She buried her face in her hands, knowing that if she ever returned, the sea would not let her go. The lighthouse would call again, the eyes would watch again, and the hunger of the deep would never be sated. Because the lighthouse at Drowning Point was not a guide to safety. It was a lure, a trap, and the sea that surrounded it was older and hungrier than any living thing. And the fog, as always, was patient. The book. Years later, sailors still whisper about the lighthouse at Drowning Point. They tell stories of strange lights, of figures in the mist, of eyes glowing in the black waves. Some claim to have heard the voice of the keeper warning them away, or calling them closer. No one knows what lies beneath the waters, only that the lighthouse never goes dark and it never stops calling. And some nights, if the wind is right and the fog thick, you can hear a woman screaming, though by morning there is no one there and the lighthouse stands silent, innocent and eternal.